The airport was alive with sound that afternoon, full of people rushing, laughing, calling loved ones, and dragging their suitcases across the shiny floor. The smell of coffee mixed with the soft echo of flight announcements, and the hum of conversation filled the air like background music. Flight 782 to New York was now boarding, and people slowly lined up, some calm, some impatient, everyone eager to get to their destination. Among the crowd stood a tall man wearing a black hoodie and sunglasses, trying to stay low-key. It was Big Shaq, the famous rapper and comedian who made millions laugh with his jokes and music. But today there was nothing loud or funny about him. He looked calm, quiet, and polite, just another traveler taking his seat. He carried no entourage, no cameras followed him. He was traveling alone. When he handed his ticket to the flight attendant, she recognized him immediately. Her eyes widened with surprise, but Big Shaq gave her a small smile and said, "How you doing, love?" in his soft London accent. She smiled back, maybe a little too much, but he didn't mind. He was used to it. She showed him to his seat in first class near the window. The cabin looked like a small world of luxury. Leather seats, quiet lights, and soft jazz music playing in the background. He placed his small bag in the overhead compartment, sat down, and adjusted his seat. He put on his headphones, then took them off again when the attendant offered him a drink. "Just water, please," he said. Simple and polite, he never liked showing off. Never wanted to be the loudest person in the room. A few minutes later, another passenger entered first class. He was shorter, maybe in his mid-40s, wearing a sharp gray suit and an expensive watch that seemed to shine under the cabin lights. His name was Darren, and everything about him screamed money. His clothes, his perfume, even the way he looked at people. He carried himself like he owned the plane. When Darren saw Big Shaq sitting there, his eyebrows lifted slightly. At first he didn't say anything, but his face clearly showed surprise, maybe even disbelief. He put his bag away, then sat in the seat across from Big Shaq, stealing glances every few seconds. It was obvious he recognized him too, but not in a friendly way. As the flight attendants moved around checking seatbelts and offering champagne, Darren leaned back, crossed his legs, and whispered to himself, "First class, huh? Didn't think rappers could afford that." His tone was low, but sharp enough that Big Shaq could hear it if he wanted to. But Shaq didn't react. He just looked out the window at the runway, watching the airport workers guide planes under the golden afternoon sun. Darren chuckled quietly and shook his head. He took out his phone, typing something quickly, probably texting a friend. His expression was smug, like he was proud of something no one else could see. A few minutes later, the boarding door closed, and the cabin quieted down. The soft voice of the pilot came over the speakers, welcoming everyone on board. The passengers in first class relaxed, getting comfortable for the long flight to New York. Some opened their laptops, others leaned back and closed their eyes. Darren called over a flight attendant and ordered a glass of whiskey. He spoke in that overly confident tone people use when they want others to notice them. "Make it double," he said with a grin. "I've had a long week of million-dollar meetings." The attendant smiled politely and walked away. Clearly unimpressed, he turned his attention back to Big Shaq, who was quietly scrolling through his phone. Darren leaned slightly forward and said, "You're that guy, right? The one from the song about not being hot." He laughed as if it were the funniest thing in the world. Big Shaq looked up, smiled softly, and said, "Yeah, that's me, brother." His voice was kind, not defensive, not arrogant, just real. But Darren wasn't done. "Didn't think I'd see you up here, though," he said, taking a sip of his drink. "Guess they'll let anyone fly first class these days." He chuckled again, expecting the people around to laugh with him, but no one did. The woman sitting across from him frowned slightly. The man beside her shook his head and looked away. Big Shaq still didn't respond. He simply turned back to the window and put his headphones on. The quiet way he handled it made Darren look foolish without him even trying. There was something powerful about that silence. As the engine started to rumble and the plane began to move, Darren's smirk faded a little. He looked out the window too, but his reflection showed a small hint of discomfort, maybe even guilt. He didn't understand why his words didn't land the way he wanted. Big Shaq, meanwhile, closed his eyes and let the soft hum of the engines drown everything else out. He had dealt with people like Darren before, loud, proud, and full of ego. He didn't hate them. He pitied them, because deep down he knew their words said more about their emptiness than his worth. As the plane lifted off the ground, The sunlight hit Big Shaq's face through the window. The clouds opened up beneath them and the world below looked peaceful. The engines roared, the sky widened, and for a brief moment everything felt calm. But that calm wouldn't last because somewhere above the clouds, a lesson in respect, humility, and human kindness was about to unfold. A lesson that Darren would never forget, and one that would make the entire cabin silent in awe before the flight was over. The plane soared high above the clouds, calm and steady, while soft music played through the cabin speakers. The air smelled faintly of coffee and clean fabric, and the passengers in first class had settled into quiet comfort. But not everyone was at peace. Darren, the man in the gray suit, leaned back in his seat, swirling the golden liquid in his glass, watching it catch the cabin light. His lips curled into a smirk as he glanced at Big Shaq, who sat across the aisle calm as a monk. Big Shaq had his headphones on, tapping his fingers lightly on the armrest to the rhythm of a beat only he could hear. He looked relaxed, even happy, staring out the window at the endless blue sky to anyone watching. He seemed like a man who didn't have a single care in the world. But Darren saw that peace as weakness. He couldn't stand it. He leaned toward the woman beside him, pretending to whisper but speaking loud enough for others to hear. "You see that guy over there?" he said, his tone playful but cruel. "That's that internet rapper, isn't it? The one who made that silly song, what was it? Man's Not Hot, right?" The woman gave a small, polite smile, trying to ignore him. But Darren wasn't done. "I swear," he continued, "the world's gone mad. I work 18 hours a day to afford this seat, and these entertainers just walk in and think they belong here." He laughed at his own words, expecting others to join in. No one did. A flight attendant passed by with a tray of snacks, and Darren stopped her. "Excuse me," he said, holding up a finger. "Can you bring me another whiskey?" The attendant nodded with a polite smile, but her eyes shifted toward Big Shaq briefly, perhaps wondering if he heard. He had, but he didn't react. Instead, he removed one headphone slowly and turned toward Darren. His expression was calm, almost gentle. "You okay, brother?" he asked softly. "You seem upset." That caught Darren off guard. "Upset," he repeated, scoffing. "No, I'm perfectly fine, mate. Just talking about how crazy the world's become." He leaned back again, eyes narrowing slightly. "People getting famous for nothing." Big Shaq smiled faintly. "Fame doesn't last long," he said. "Character does." Then he put his headphone back on and turned away. It was a simple line, but it hit harder than Darren expected. For a moment, he didn't have a comeback. The flight attendant brought his drink, and he took a quick sip, trying to shake off the strange feeling in his chest. But pride wouldn't let him stop character. He muttered under his breath. "We'll see about that." He started speaking louder, pretending again to talk to himself. "I met real artists before, real legends, people with class. Not some YouTube star who thinks he's a big deal because of one song." His voice carried just enough to reach the other seats. A few passengers glanced his way, then quickly looked down at their books or screens. The tension was thick now. Big Shaq didn't say a word. But his silence had power. It wasn't fear or submission. It was patience, the kind that only strong people have. And that quiet patience made Darren more uncomfortable than any argument could have. Minutes passed. The plane hit a patch of turbulence. Shaking slightly, cups rattled. A few gasps echoed through the cabin. Big Shaq calmly reached for the glass of the woman beside him before it spilled. "You all right?" he asked kindly. She nodded, blushing a little. "Thank you," she said softly. Darren's drink, however, sloshed all over his shirt. "For God's sake," he snapped, glaring at the flight attendant as if it were her fault. The woman quickly handed him a napkin, but Big Shaq quietly took another from his tray and offered it too. "Here, bro, you missed a spot," he said kindly. That moment should have cooled things down, but it only made Darren angrier. He felt embarrassed. A rich man, dripping whiskey on his fancy suit, while the man he mocked was helping others like a gentleman. He snatched the napkin without a thank you and muttered, "Save your pity." Big Shaq didn't reply. He simply leaned back, eyes half closed, breathing slowly. His calmness was like a mirror, showing Darren exactly who he was, loud, bitter, and small. When the turbulence passed, the cabin lights dimmed slightly. Dinner service began. The smell of roasted chicken and warm bread filled the air, and most passengers relaxed again. But Darren couldn't. His thoughts kept circling, filled with irritation and pride. He picked up his phone, pretending to scroll, but his mind was racing. Who does he think he is, he thought. Just sitting there like he's better than me? He looked over again and saw Big Shaq laughing quietly at something on his tablet. That small, genuine laugh burned Darren more than any insult could have. The flight attendant returned to check on passengers. "Everything all right, sir?" she asked Darren. He forced a smile. "Perfect," he said through clenched teeth. But as soon as she walked away, he whispered just loud enough for the row to hear. Some people get lucky once and think they're untouchable. Still, Big Shaq didn't bite. He stayed in his own calm space. Headphones on, head slightly bobbing, lost in rhythm. The more peaceful he appeared. The more restless Darren became, it was strange. Like his own anger was turning inward, making him feel smaller, weaker. A few passengers started to glance at him with quiet disapproval. He noticed it too, and it only fueled his frustration. Finally, he leaned back, shaking his head with a bitter smile. "Can't believe I paid thousands to sit next to this," he muttered. Big Shaq removed one earphone again, looked straight at him and said softly, "You'll believe it soon enough." Then he smiled, not an angry smile, not mocking, but one full of quiet strength. And somehow that calm, confident look was the first time Darren's heart skipped a beat. For reasons he couldn't explain, he suddenly felt that maybe he had picked the wrong man to mock. The engines hummed, the lights dimmed, and the sky outside grew darker as the plane cut through the clouds. But inside that calm cabin, the tension between two men was only just beginning. And no one, not even Darren, could have guessed what would happen next. The plane had been in the air for over an hour now, the world below hidden beneath thick layers of white clouds. Most of the passengers had relaxed into the quiet rhythm of the flight. Soft conversations, the clinking of glasses, and the low hum of the engines filling the cabin. But for Darren, the man in the gray suit, peace was impossible. His pride still burned. Every second of Big Shaq's calm silence felt like a personal insult. Big Shaq sat 2 seats away, peaceful as ever, eyes closed, headphones on, his body slightly rocking to the rhythm of music no one else could hear. He looked completely at ease. His stillness almost glowed with confidence, the kind that comes from knowing who you are. That calmness irritated Darren more than any loud argument could. Darren ordered another drink, even though he didn't need it. His glass clinked softly as he swirled the amber liquid, staring at it like it held the answer to his frustration. He kept glancing at Big Shaq, waiting and hoping for him to slip, to say something back, something that could justify the anger bubbling inside him. But Big Shaq didn't give him that satisfaction. Not even once. Finally, Darren leaned over the aisle, pretending to adjust his shoe. "So," he said loudly, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "do they pay you enough for that song to fly first class? Or did someone buy your ticket?" A couple of nearby passengers looked up, their eyes wide. They couldn't believe someone was saying that out loud. Big Shaq opened one eye slowly, then the other. He took off his headphones, placed them gently on his lap, and turned his head. His voice was quiet, almost too calm. "You got a lot of questions, bro," he said. "You okay?" The simplicity of that question froze Darren for a second. "What? Of course I'm okay," he snapped. "I'm just curious how some people get lucky, that's all." Big Shaq smiled. Not a big grin, just a small, understanding smile. "Luck's funny," he said. "It finds people who work for it." Then he turned back to the window. Just like that, ending the conversation with grace. The silence that followed felt heavy. A woman across the aisle shifted in her seat uncomfortably. A man nearby coughed softly, trying to break the tension. Darren's face flushed red. He took another long drink, his hand trembling just a little. A few minutes passed, the cabin lights dimmed, and the flight attendants began preparing the meal service. Plates clattered softly, and the smell of roasted chicken and warm bread filled the air. Big Shaq thanked the attendant politely when his tray arrived. Darren didn't even look up. He just muttered something under his breath and stabbed his food with a fork. When the attendant came to Darren's side, he pointed at Big Shaq's plate. "He gets the special meal." "Huh," he said, pretending to joke. The attendant frowned politely. "Sir, everyone in first class receives the same service," but Darren wasn't joking. He laughed to himself, shaking his head. "Yeah, sure," he said, loud enough for others to hear. Big Shaq didn't respond. He had already put his headphones back on. But this time he wasn't listening to music, he was thinking. Remembering all the times people had mistaken his kindness for weakness. He wasn't angry. Not yet. He knew anger only gave power to people who didn't deserve it. So he waited, calm and patient, letting the man's own words sink him deeper into his own bitterness. The plane rocked slightly as it passed through a light cloud pocket. A few passengers gasped quietly, but it wasn't serious. The captain's calm voice came over the intercom, reassuring everyone that everything was fine. Darren laughed nervously. "Hope the pilot's not listening to rap while flying," he said, grinning at no one in particular. No one laughed. The joke fell flat in the quiet cabin. He looked around at no smiles, no nods, just cold silence. Everyone could see it now. The problem wasn't Big Shaq, it was Darren, the man beside Darren, who had been quiet the entire flight, finally spoke. "Hey, mate," he said softly. "Maybe let it go, yeah?" Darren turned, eyes narrowing. "What's that supposed to mean?" he snapped. The man shrugged. "Means you sound drunk and bitter. And it's getting old." That single sentence hit Darren harder than he expected. He looked around and saw a few heads turn away quickly. People pretending not to watch, but clearly aware, he realized for the first time, that maybe everyone had been silently judging him all along. Big Shaq, still calm, turned his head slightly and said, "It's all right, let him talk. Sometimes people talk loud because no one listens to them on the ground." His tone wasn't sharp. It was gentle. Almost sad. Darren froze. He didn't know how to answer that. His throat tightened, his ego cracked. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words refused to come. Then something unexpected happened. The turbulence hit harder. The plane jolted. A sudden dip made a few passengers cry out. Darren's drink spilled all over his tray. The same woman he'd tried to impress earlier gasped. Clutching her armrest, Big Shaq immediately leaned across the aisle, steadying her tray before it slid. "You're good." "Yeah?" he asked softly. She nodded. "Thank you." The turbulence passed as quickly as it came, but the silence afterward was deeper than before. Big Shaq returned to his seat, calm as ever, while Darren sat stiff, his heart pounding. He couldn't stop replaying that one line in his head. Sometimes people talk loud because no one listens to them on the ground. For the first time since takeoff, Darren looked out the window past the clouds and saw nothing but emptiness. For the first time, he felt small. He looked at Big Shaq, really looked at him, and noticed something he hadn't before. There was no anger there, no pride, just peace. Quiet strength and patience. It was something money couldn't buy. The engines hummed softly. The flight attendants whispered quietly as they moved through the aisles, and the rest of the passengers returned to their screens and books. But Darren sat still, staring at the man he had mocked, realizing that maybe, just maybe, he had been the fool all along. The flight wasn't halfway over, but something in the air had already changed, and deep down, Darren knew this calm before the storm wouldn't last forever. Because the real payback, the kind that teaches you who you really are, was still to come. Hours passed, and the long flight drifted into that strange in-between time, when everyone feels suspended between worlds. The cabin lights dimmed. The hum of the engine softened into a steady whisper. Most passengers had their eyes closed, resting under the faint glow of reading lamps. But not Darren. He sat wide awake, one leg shaking restlessly under the table. The drinks had slowed his mind, but not his thoughts. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Big Shaq's calm face, that patient, unbothered look that somehow cut deeper than any insult could. It bothered him more than he cared to admit. Big Shaq, on the other hand, was at peace. His eyes were closed, headphones on, his head tilted slightly toward the window. The soft light of the moon fell across his face, making him look almost serene. He wasn't sleeping, just thinking. He had learned long ago that silence was a man's best weapon when others tried to provoke him. The plane glided smoothly through the night sky until, suddenly it didn't. A rough shake rippled through the cabin, a sharp jolt that made glasses clink and passengers gasp. The seatbelt sign lit up with a ding, followed by the captain's calm voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a bit of turbulence. Please remain seated and keep your belts fastened." The plane dipped again, harder this time. A few screams echoed from the back. One of the flight attendants stumbled, grabbing the nearest seat to steady herself. Drinks spilled, and a tray of dessert slid off the counter. Darren's eyes went wide, his earlier arrogance evaporating in seconds. His hand clutched the armrest so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "What's happening?" he said in a shaky voice. His whiskey glass toppled and shattered on the floor. The smell of alcohol filled the air. Big Shaq took off his headphones slowly and looked around. "It's all right, bro," he said calmly. "Just turbulence. Happens all the time." He looked at the terrified woman sitting across the aisle, the same one he had helped earlier. She was trembling, her eyes fixed on the window without hesitation. Big Shaq unbuckled his seatbelt for just a second, reached across and gently helped her secure her own properly. "Breathe slow," he said softly. "We're good, yeah?" His tone was steady, deep, reassuring. It was the kind of voice that could quiet a storm. The plane shook again, overhead bins rattled, and one of them popped open. A small bag started to fall, and in a quick motion, Big Shaq reached up and caught it before it hit the man in front. The passengers around him gasped, partly from fear, partly in surprise. Meanwhile, Darren was frozen. His eyes darted everywhere, at the wings, the ceiling. The attendants, looking for signs of doom. He wasn't used to not being in control. His confidence melted away, replaced by pure panic. "Is this normal?" he asked no one in particular. His voice trembling. The flight attendant, struggling to stay steady, nodded. "Yes, sir. Please stay calm." But Darren wasn't calm. His breath came fast, shallow. He fumbled with his seatbelt, trying to tighten it too much. His suit was wrinkled now, his perfect image falling apart just like his composure. Big Shaq leaned over slightly, his voice still even. "You good, man?" he asked. Darren didn't answer. He just stared ahead, jaw tight, breathing through his teeth. The arrogance that once filled his voice was gone, replaced by fear. After several tense minutes, the turbulence began to ease. The cabin lights flickered once and then steadied. The pilot came back on the intercom, assuring everyone that the worst was over. A wave of quiet relief swept through the passengers. Some laughed nervously, others clapped softly. The flight attendants hurried to check on everyone, picking up fallen trays and offering tissues. Big Shaq helped one of them gather a few scattered cups, handing them back with a polite smile. "You all right, miss?" he asked. She nodded gratefully. "Thank you, sir," she said. And just like that, the mood began to shift. People who had been strangers just hours ago now shared glances of comfort and gratitude. But Darren stayed silent, staring at Big Shaq, the same man he had mocked. Insulted and belittled, he watched how Shaq helped others before himself, how he stayed calm when everyone else panicked. It didn't make sense to him. How could someone he called a clown show more strength and composure than him? A man who prided himself on being powerful. For the first time, Darren felt something unfamiliar. It wasn't envy, it wasn't guilt, it was shame, a deep, heavy shame that settled in his chest and refused to move. He looked down at his hands, the same ones that had once pointed and mocked, now trembling slightly. His reflection in the dark window looked different, smaller, weaker. The flight attendant came by and asked if he needed anything. He shook his head. "I'm fine," he said softly. His voice no longer carried that proud tone. Big Shaq leaned back again, eyes on the stars beyond the glass. The quiet night stretched on. Peaceful once more, the cabin was calm again. But something had changed in the air. The balance between the two men had shifted completely. Big Shaq didn't need to say a word. His actions had spoken louder than any insult ever could. And Darren knew it for the rest of that flight. He didn't speak another cruel word. He didn't roll his eyes or laugh. He just sat there silent, replaying every moment in his head. But what he didn't know was that this was only the beginning. Because before the plane would touch the ground again, Big Shaq's calm heart and quiet strength would be tested one more time, in a way that would leave the entire cabin stunned. And Darren completely speechless. The cabin lights glowed a soft amber now, like the quiet warmth of an evening fireplace. The turbulence had passed, but its echo lingered in everyone's chest. People spoke in low voices, some still clinging to their drinks a little tighter than before. A sense of quiet gratitude filled the air, yet no one could miss how differently two men sat in that front row now. Big Shaq sat calm and steady, his body relaxed but alert. He was scrolling through a few messages on his phone, laughing softly at something a fan had sent him across the aisle. Darren sat stiff, his suit jacket open, tie slightly loosened. His hands rested on his lap, still and silent for the first time since takeoff. He hadn't said a word since the turbulence ended. The silence between them wasn't awkward anymore. It was heavy. Meaningful. Darren's pride had been shaken like the plane itself. But somewhere deep inside, another feeling was starting to grow, something that felt a lot like respect. A flight attendant walked by, thanking Big Shaq again for helping during the turbulence. "You've got good reflexes, sir," she said with a warm smile. He laughed. "Gotta keep them sharp, you never know when life throws something your way." His tone was light, but there was truth hidden in it not long after. A sound came from behind it, a soft, choked gasp followed by a cry. Passengers turned, startled. A woman shouted, "Someone help! He's not breathing!" Panic spread like fire. A man in business class had collapsed in his seat. His face pale, his head tilted back unnaturally. The crew rushed forward, calling for assistance. "Is there a doctor on board?" one attendant shouted. But no one answered. The cabin went tense again, eyes darting, whispers rising. The woman beside the man cried uncontrollably. Before anyone could react, Big Shaq was already on his feet. He unbuckled without hesitation and stepped across the aisle. "Move back, please," he said firmly, his deep voice cutting through the chaos. There was no panic in his tone, only command. People listened. Clearing space for him, Darren blinked, confused. "What's he doing?" he muttered, watching as Big Shaq knelt beside the unconscious man. He placed 2 fingers gently on the man's neck, then looked up at the attendant. "He's got a pulse, but it's weak. We need to lay him flat." Together with the crew, he helped lower the man across the aisle. "Bring me oxygen and cold water," he said quickly. His calmness anchored everyone else. A few passengers helped hand over items. Darren still frozen in disbelief. The crew brought an oxygen mask, and Big Shaq adjusted it carefully over the man's face. "Stay with me, boss, you're gonna be all right," he said softly. The man's chest rose slowly, then again. Then a faint cough escaped his lips. A few gasps echoed, relief, amazement, disbelief. The flight attendant pressed the intercom, informing the captain that the passenger was responsive. A ripple of applause spread quietly through the cabin, people clapping softly, eyes wide with admiration. Big Shaq sat back on his heels, exhaling deeply. His hands were steady, his face calm. He gave a small nod to the attendant. "He's good now. But keep the oxygen steady till we land." The attendant, eyes glistening, whispered, "You saved him." He smiled. "Nah, just did what anyone would do." But everyone knew that wasn't true. Not everyone would have stood up. Not everyone would have known what to do. And certainly not everyone would have stayed calm enough to save a stranger 30,000 feet above the ground. Darren sat frozen in his seat, watching every movement. His heart pounded. He had mocked that man, belittled him, called him lucky. And now that same man had just saved someone's life in front of him. He felt something break inside, the wall of arrogance he had built so carefully. For the first time, he saw Big Shaq not as a celebrity, not as a rapper, but as a man, and strong, humble, and kind. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, please give a round of thanks to our passenger who assisted in a medical emergency. We're proud to have heroes like him on board." Everyone clapped again, louder this time. Some even stood, smiling through tears. Big Shaq simply bowed his head slightly in acknowledgement. Then he sat back down quietly, putting his headphones aside. Darren couldn't bring himself to look at him. His throat felt tight. He swallowed hard, guilt burning inside him like fire. He wanted to say something, but the words got stuck. The silence stretched between them like a heavy truth. Finally, after several long minutes, he spoke, just one word, barely above a whisper. "Thanks." Big Shaq turned his head slightly, that same calm half-smile on his lips. "For what?" he asked. "For everything," Darren said quietly, his voice cracking. Big Shaq nodded once, his gaze soft. "It's all good, brother. Life's a flight. Sometimes it shakes you up so you see things clearer." Those words sank deep. They didn't sound like a lecture. They sounded like wisdom, simple, real, and earned. The rest of the cabin slowly returned to calm, but something had changed in the air. The arrogance that once filled the front row was gone, replaced by something gentler, quieter. And as the plane cut through the dark sky, Darren sat in silence, finally understanding that he had met someone who didn't need to prove power, because real power didn't shout, it acted. He had insulted Big Shaq once, mocked his fame, laughed at his past, but tonight he'd seen the truth. The man he tried to belittle had just become the reason another man would live to see tomorrow. And Darren, for the first time in years, felt small in the best possible way. Humbled, changed, and strangely grateful. The flight had grown quieter now, the kind of calm that settles after something powerful has just happened. The air felt softer, heavier somehow, as if everyone was still processing what they'd just witnessed. Outside, the night sky stretched endless and black, with only the faint shimmer of stars blinking through the thin clouds. Big Shaq sat back in his seat again, eyes half closed, a faint smile resting on his face. He wasn't thinking about applause, or headlines, or what people might say. He was just relieved the man was safe. A simple thing, but it meant everything. The attendants had covered the fainted passenger with a blanket, checking on him every few minutes, and each time they did, they glanced at Big Shaq with quiet gratitude. The whole front section of the plane now carried a different kind of energy. Not tension, not arrogance, but respect. And Darren could feel it the most. He hadn't said much since the incident. He couldn't. Words felt useless after what he'd seen. He'd spent the last hour replaying the moment in his head. The way Big Shaq had jumped up without hesitation. The way he'd known what to do. The calm in his voice when everyone else had panicked. That image was burned into Darren's mind. And with every replay, something inside him shifted. The pride that once fueled him now felt hollow, fragile. He stared at his reflection in the dark airplane window and saw someone he didn't quite recognize anymore. Finally, he turned toward Big Shaq. The words came out slowly, almost like he had to force them through a locked door. "Hey," he said quietly. Big Shaq removed one headphone and looked at him. "Yeah, brother," Darren's voice faltered. "Listen, I owe you an apology." His tone was shaky but real. "Back there, before all this, I was—" He stopped himself, took a breath. "I was being an idiot. I thought I was better than you, but now—" He trailed off, looking down at his hands. "Now I realize I wasn't better than anyone." Big Shaq didn't respond right away. He leaned back, eyes on him, then gave a small nod. "Takes a man to admit that," he said quietly. "We all mess up, brother. What matters is what you do after." Darren nodded slowly. Swallowing hard, his throat felt tight. "I judged you before I even knew you," he said, "just because I thought you didn't belong here." Big Shaq smiled faintly. "People said the same about me my whole life, mate. When you grow up in the rough parts, they tell you you'll never sit in a seat like this. But here we are." He glanced out the window. "Life's funny like that. For the first time since takeoff." Darren smiled too, and a small, tired, genuine smile. "You know," he said softly, "I've met hundreds of people with power, money, influence, but I've never seen anyone handle things like you did back there." Big Shaq chuckled. "Power's not about shouting the loudest, my guy. It's about staying calm when the world shakes." The simplicity of that line hit Darren deeper than any long speech could. He leaned back, letting out a slow breath. "You ever get tired of people underestimating you?" he asked after a moment. "All the time," Big Shaq said, laughing quietly. "But I stopped trying to prove them wrong. I just live in a way that makes them question themselves." Darren nodded, staring down at his half-empty glass of water. His reflection wavered in it. "Guess I'm one of those people," he said softly. Big Shaq looked at him for a long second, then said, "Not anymore." "You saw what mattered." There was a long silence after that. The kind that wasn't awkward, just peaceful. Darren looked out the window again, watching the stars shimmer like silver dust scattered across the dark. The plane glided smoothly through the sky, a thin moon glowing faintly over the horizon. He found himself thinking about his own life, all the meetings, deals, and arguments he'd chased like they were gold. How many people had he brushed off the way he brushed off Big Shaq earlier? How many moments of kindness had he ignored because they didn't look like success? For the first time in years, he felt something he couldn't remember the last time he'd felt: humility. When the attendants came by again, Darren surprised everyone by standing to help. He took a few trays from them, stacking cups and napkins with care. When one of them tried to stop him, he said, "It's fine. I could use the practice." His tone carried no arrogance, only sincerity. Big Shaq watched with a small grin. Shaking his head slightly, he leaned over and said, "Careful, bro. They might hire you after this flight." Darren laughed for real that time. A deep, honest laugh, the first genuine one of the night. The cabin slowly settled back into quiet comfort, but between those two men, something invisible had changed. The air felt lighter now. Their silence no longer carried pride or judgment. It carried understanding. As Darren sat back down, he looked across the aisle and said, "For what it's worth, you changed how I see people tonight." Big Shaq nodded once. "Then the flight was worth it," he said simply. And that was it. No grand speeches, no applause. Just a simple exchange between two people who had finally seen each other clearly. Outside, The horizon was beginning to glow faintly as the first signs of dawn touched the edge of the world. The plane was still hours from landing, but for Darren, something inside him had already touched the ground. Humility. He sat quietly, watching the slow light spread through the sky, thinking that maybe, just maybe, the man he'd insulted at the start of the flight had just saved more than one life that night. Morning light began to break through the windows, soft and golden, spreading across the quiet cabin like a whisper. The passengers stirred slowly, stretching, yawning, murmuring to each other as breakfast trays rolled out. The night had been long, but the tension that once filled the air was gone, replaced by calm, the kind that comes after a storm. Big Shaq sat by the window, hood down now, watching the sunrise. His expression was peaceful, almost thoughtful. The first rays painted his face in warm light, and for a moment, he looked more like a man reflecting on life than the celebrity people saw on screens. Across the aisle, Darren sat upright, looking at him quietly. He hadn't slept at all. His mind had been turning all night, replaying every word, every moment. He couldn't stop thinking about how one flight, just one, had turned his whole perspective upside down. The man he mocked had turned out to be someone he admired, and the strange part was, Big Shaq hadn't tried to impress anyone. He'd just been himself, calm, patient, kind. It made Darren realize how rare that was. When the attendant brought breakfast, she smiled. "Would you like eggs or pancakes?" "Sir?" Darren blinked. Eggs, please." He smiled back awkwardly. His voice didn't carry the same arrogance anymore. Just quiet gratitude. Big Shaq ordered the same. "And a coffee if you got it, love black," he said warmly. When the food came, he thanked her sincerely, and she beamed, clearly still touched by what he'd done the night before. As the passengers ate, whispers began spreading through the cabin. Someone had recognized him now. Phones were out, screens lighting up with searches for Big Shaq. People were connecting the dots. The hero from last night wasn't just any man. He was that man. The internet was already catching on. One of the business-class passengers had uploaded a short clip of him helping during the emergency, and it had already gone viral before the plane even landed. But Big Shaq didn't seem to care. He just kept eating, laughing quietly when the attendant told him, "You're trending again, sir." He shrugged. "If it helps people see something good, I'm cool with it." Darren listened, feeling a strange mix of guilt and awe. He finally gathered the courage to speak. "You know," he said softly, "you could have humiliated me last night. No one would have blamed you if you did." Big Shaq looked up. "Why would I do that?" "Because I deserved it," Darren said. "I said awful things to you, and you just stayed calm." He paused. "You made me look at myself, and I didn't like what I saw." Big Shaq nodded slowly. "Most people don't," he said. "But that's how we change, bro. You don't get wiser by being right. You get wiser when you realize you were wrong." The words hit deep. Darren smiled faintly. "You're a better man than I gave you credit for," he said. "A better man than I've been in a long time." Shaq laughed softly. "Nah, man. I just had more practice learning the hard way." There was something about the way he said it. Humble, but filled with truth. The kind of wisdom that doesn't come from books or money, but from surviving. A few minutes later, the captain's voice broke the calm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our descent into New York. Local time is 6:45 a.m., and the weather is clear." Passengers began preparing, buckling up, fixing hair, gathering their things. But there was an unusual excitement in the air. Not the usual rush to leave, but a quiet sense that they'd all shared something rare, something human. As the plane descended, the morning sun bathed the clouds in gold. Darren looked out the window, eyes soft. "You ever think life puts people in your path for a reason?" he asked. Big Shaq smiled. "All the time," he said. "Some to test you, some to teach you. Guess I was both." "Huh," Darren said with a half smile. Shaq laughed. "Maybe, but you passed the second part, that's what counts."